Welcome back and to part 3. Part 3 we will cover account settings in Search Central. And as part of covering the account settings section, we will cover the preferences section, the notifications. We'll talk a bit about single sign-on, access control, of which single sign-on is a component. We'll talk about product settings, and we're going to talk about custom fields. So looking at Search Central, the first thing that we want to do is to take note of the fact that Search Central's settings is managed by only those particular users that have privileges to do so. So this tab would not appear for instance, a standard user or even a manager. This is an administrative function. And the reason for that is because there is a large number of different items that you can configure with the settings. So for an example, you can see here that there is something here called a request note. Now this request note is a custom note that you can add that will appear at the beginning of every single page that you would use when placing an order. So as an example, if we wanted to say something like, if I said here, if this is an example text and I wanted to save that settings, it meant that when I go and I actually want to place a request for any certificate, it means that I'm actually going to see that displayed on the enrollment form. So you can see here that this text is now evident within the actual workflow. And this is the same for the guest URL. When someone is placing the request for an order, we will also display this text. So very useful, and it is used a lot by a lot of big enterprises to give their requesters instructions when placing orders, and even links to internal knowledge base sites that they might have. You can also change the time, and you can configure some client certificate settings. We'll talk about verified contacts because this one is sometimes not well understood by many users. A verified contact is a Search Central or a non-Search Central user that has gone through a verification process that we will use in order to allow them to issue extended validation certificates. That is the primary use case for a verified contact. And this is an important distinction because when you're placing orders in Search Central, you can pick from a list of administrators, and those administrators might be verified contacts. And so when you have an administrator that's placing an order for an EV certificate, and that administrator is also a verified contact, the certificate will issue immediately. However, if the administrator is not a verified contact, then that will require approval from a verified contact that is associated with that organization. In this case, this option here basically says that it means that you can add a non-verified contact that's not within Search Central. And this is usually a use case for partners where the person that's receiving the certificate is not the same as the person that's placing the order. Active validation refers to the act of organizations validation, which means that our team will be reaching out to do revalidations for expiring organizations. So this has nothing to do with domains. You can choose the default Dcv methods that appear within the account. So for example, if you were managing an account and you didn't want anyone to choose CNAME or this HTTP practical demonstration as a method, but only DNS text and Dcv email, then you would configure this as the default method. So it does mean that these two options would not show up during the enrollment request. So if you wanted them all to still show up, you'd have to make sure they're all checked. And this behavior relates to this Dcv email. This basically says by default, which email addresses will we automatically send the Dcv confirmation email to. The other very important setting to know about is the domain validation scope. So when placing a request for an order to get a certificate, and you're using a particular domain that's maybe not like a subdomain that you want to rather have someone get a certificate for, let's say, test.domain.com. If you put the scope of approval on test.domain.com, it means that someone can add, let's say they're choosing the DNS text Dcv method. It means that they could add the random value that we give them to either um, the base domain, or they could do it on the actual domain name. So in this case, they would put it on test.domain.com, and on this case, it would be on domain.com. Our validation team can also change this behavior on a pending order. So if there is any confusion, of course, they can help, but this is typically how it works. And we explain this in good detail by showing the recommended method and how you can validate additional domains by, for example, making sure that you're always validating the base domain. The benefit of validating the base domain is that any orders that you place for subdomains off of the base domain will always automatically be approved for a validation. So people.co.za, getting that authenticated in the account means that I could submit any number or any combination of subdomains. But if you only did a validation on the exact domain, it means that you would have to do DCV again for other subdomains. One of the other options that we recently introduced is also this idea of approved email domains. And this is an additional security feature that relates to if users want to sign up in the account, then they can do so provided that they belong to domains from these particular ones that are listed in this list. So this is a security measure because it means that you can't have anyone that doesn't have an email address already for these domains added to the account. Then we can see for certificate requests, there's additional functionality. So all certificates need to be logged to the public, all certificates need to be logged to the certificate transparency logs if they want to be trusted in browsers. However, it is possible to modify that behavior. And in this case, the option we're saying is allow the certificate requester to choose their own preference. But fundamentally, this option is kind of what you would want for most of the requests, because certificates should ideally be logged so that they can be in browsers. These other options here just relate to kind of what someone will see in the UI. You can also, we've spoken at some length about the approval workflow within the account, and you can see here that there is a way to skip the approval process for managers and administrators. It just makes it a bit easier for them. But it does not mean that standard users and finance managers no longer need to have their requests approved. So that's a very important point. But as you can see, you can have one step, which means that the administrator must approve the request. It also means they can approve their own request. And if you want to set very stringent authentication onto the account, or a review, then 2 steps is the option you'd want to choose, because that means that 2 different Cert Central administrators would have to approve the request. And you can see there's a few additional options here regarding revocations and some of the additional certificate options and some API settings. Moving on to the notifications tab in Cert Central. This is a very powerful feature because it allows you to manipulate the communication that you receive from us. So depending on what it is that you want to change, at a minimum, you can start with the notification settings. So email addresses for account notifications. You can see here that this relates to basically any life cycle event or account and promotional emails from DigiCert. So when someone approves a certificate or when there's a pending request, whether or not that user is an administrator in Search Central, if you add the email address here, then they will receive those notifications. The emergency notifications is more for DigiCert that we will use to send for example, revocation requests. If we need to revoke a certificate, this is who we would contact, as well as the primary administrator in the account. You can also change the default language for the notifications, and you can also choose in detail who should be receiving what email. So as an example, order confirmation will be essentially the fulfillment email, right, which is the certificate. And in this case, if you don't want everyone to receive that certificate, then you would need to make sure that you're being very specific as to who should receive that. Approval emails is obviously the emails that administrators receive to approve a request, and as well as the other templates that exist. You can also change the cadence. You can choose additional emails that need to receive renewal reminders. And you can configure the default option, for example, that a user would use when retrieving their certificate. There are additional options that you can review. Again, this will be covered in the study guide, but looking at Search Central as well is useful, and testing out the different combination of how it behaves versus what these settings look like. And so finally, as it relates to notifications, you'll see that we actually have a custom email template feature. This has to be activated on the account, but it essentially allows organizations to create their own email templates in case they have their own systems internally, whereby they want to manipulate or modify some of the variables that appear in the default email that we send. So you can see here that there's a very large list of different variables that someone can use to tailor the message that they want to use for their recipients. The authentication settings page is important because it allows you to set the access control methods for the account. There are various different access control methods within Search Central, but setting up two-factor authentication is the first of these different options. So we essentially have two different requirements that you can add. The one is a one-time password, which is essentially like a 30-second digit that you'll get on your mobile or your cell, and you would use that to enter into Search Central while you're trying to log in. The client certificate, on the other hand, is an actual certificate that you'd have to generate, and Search Central would require that for authentication before allowing you to access. In terms of the additional options here, you can choose for that to relate to either a specific user or the entire account. We can also quickly talk about single sign-on. At the moment, there is no relationship that's been configured in this account. However, that said, it's a fairly easy process. When we're talking about setting up single sign-on, what we're really talking about is SAML authentication to the account. So the identity provider here is this would be your internal application that you're using, or that someone is using. Internally, someone might be using a service like Okta or Active Directory Federated Services, or perhaps Microsoft's Azure service, whereby they want their users to log in from their already authenticated system into Search Central, rather than them having to log in through Search Central's login page. So what's happening here is that we're setting up the connection from the identity provider, and then the service provider is obviously DigiCert. So for us, we're saying this is the link that you need to log into DigiCert. And so their application will try to use this URL and pass the authentication credentials onto us when trying to log in. And here they need to tell us where the credentials are going to be coming from. And this is effectively how you would set up single sign-on. We also have additional access control methods as it relates to IP restrictions. So you can add an IP rule and There are different IP rules that you can add. You might want to push these as an account-wide rule, and this could be for an IP range, like maybe just one IP address or a whole range. You might also want to have it apply to a user, or quite importantly, maybe guest URLs, right? Because guest URLs is like a link that you create that anyone can access. And if it's a single guest URL or multiple, that increases the scope of someone that's potentially trying to order fraudulent certificates. And the more individual requests you have to thoroughly review, the more risk it puts on a certificate requester. And then finally, moving on to product settings, we see that there's a variety of different options available for each particular product that someone can configure. Again, there is a lot of detail on these pages, so I encourage you to refer to the study guide and your notes. But in a nutshell, you can see that we have a good summary here, or an overview of all the different products and which products are enabled. If we go to, for example, I ordered SecureSite Pro earlier. If we look at all the options that you can configure, you can choose your certificate transparency logs behavior for a particular product. You can choose the validity period that you want to restrict. You could restrict which intermediate chains that they're able to select. You can restrict which hashes. You can also choose or disallow whether they're allowed to choose the option to automatically reissue or renew the order and the certificate respectively. And you can also limit the number of SANs and choose whether or not you want to allow wildcards. And lastly, custom order form fields. This is essentially a tool that you can use to create any field and define the type of data that you're looking for. So you can say, for example, if you want to add a custom field, and I'm just going to say here's an example, test 1, 2, 3, 4. You can choose the input type. You might want that to be an email address list, or you might want that to be a single email address, or text. In this case, I've got text and integers, so I'll just choose anything. And then you can choose whether or not that's required or not for placing orders. And once you've done that, you can just go ahead and say add custom field. And it means then that you'll see here, we've got your test 1, 2, 3, input type is anything and it's required. So what that means is when I try to place a certificate request at the moment, previously we saw that there was a number of fields within this list that we didn't really interact with. In brackets here, it says that all of these are optional, but it actually won't let me place the order unless I enter a value here. And we can quickly just take a look at that, what that looks like. So you see, if we did not fill that out, it would error out. So here we could just add some data and you can submit that. So it is also possible to modify custom field data on a pending or an issued order. So you'll see if I scroll here to the bottom, under additional info, we have all the custom fields. There's the value that I originally set, but of course this can be updated at any time. After having covered all of these different options, we looked at the settings configuration part here in Search Central. We looked at how you can configure notifications, how you can set default behavior, the different levels of access control. We looked at some of the product settings and the custom fields and what you can do there. Again, I highly encourage you to refer to the study guide, which contains a lot of the detail, but hopefully today's overview has given you a deep dive, but also a good understanding of how to use Search Central, the different components of it, the different options, and answers any of the main questions that you had. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.